Thank you again for joining us today for Tenant Leaders Advancing Housing Justice. We have a really great panel today, and I'm really excited for you all to learn more from them. My name is Sid Betancourt, and I'm a housing advocacy organizer with the Coalition, and I use she, they pronouns. Before we dive a little bit deeper into the whole panel, I just really want to make sure that I share some ground rules ahead of time. And first and foremost, with folks who are sharing their lived experience, you might hear about some folks' experiences with incarceration during this session, and it's just important that you don't ask folks why they were incarcerated, as it is inappropriate. And additionally, we will have about 15 minutes at the end of the session for Q&A from the audience as well, so make sure that you're prepping for those questions. And then the last, housekeeping rule that I have is just to make sure that you silence your phones. People are gonna share their stories, and we wanna make sure that we respect that time as well, so. Yeah, so with that, I'll go ahead and get us started with introducing our lovely panel. So to begin, we have Dee Ross sitting right next to me here, who's the CEO and founder of the Ross Foundation, which is a statewide grassroots organization in Indiana that oversees the Indiana Tenant Association and the Indianapolis Tenant Rights Union. And he also sits on the Hoosier Houser Needs Coalition, which is an NLIHC member. And you can read more about Dee here. And then joining us virtually, we have Maddie Berry Evans, who, there she is on the screen. Hello, Maddie. Who is a member of the Resident Action Project in Washington and is a resident services coordinator with the Mercy Housing Company. And Maddie has worked with residents in New Tacoma, and she actually helped create the Resident Action Project in Washington in 2020 with organizing folks in Tacoma. And she also specializes in the work of community with providing residents with any community resources that they might need and any support that they might need. And last but certainly not least, we have Taylor Newell, who uses she, her pronouns, and she's the executive director of Who Speaks for Me, a local organization. It's a national organization, but Taylor is a local, and it's an organization that is designed, that she designed while incarcerated. And during her time in prison, Taylor spent her time assisting other incarcerated people with their internal grievances, as well as pro se motions for post-conviction relief. So I try to keep it as brief as I possibly could in my remarks, but I do want to thank you all for being here today to talk about your experiences as a tenant advocate and just as an advocate in general. So I'll go ahead and get us started. So this next question will be for all three of you. And it'll be, can you just tell us a little bit more about yourselves and what brought you to the space that you work in now? And Dee, let's go ahead and begin with you.
Yeah. So I was born and raised on the far east side of Indianapolis. If you don't know about the far east side of Indianapolis, it is the biggest food desert in the Midwest. And I grew up in high poverty on a street called 42nd and Post Road. And this area also has had the highest homicide rate for the last 10 to 15 years. And also it has not one public school anymore. It has not one grocery store. It has not one bank. It has not one pharmacy. And this is the area I grew up in, born and raised. And over the time, I ended up joining a gang, ended up becoming a leader of a gang. Lost 54 friends to gun violence. And after seeing two of my friends kill each other in 2013, over $50, I said enough is enough. And I set out on this journey to end generational poverty, generational hopelessness, and generational trauma. A year after seeing, a couple years before seeing two of my friends kill each other, I was unlawfully evicted. When I was 8, I stayed in a shelter as a kid. And so just knowing the trauma that comes with living in a shelter, being displaced, and growing up with that trauma and not knowing how to handle it, never went to therapy, it was never a thing in my family. My family was a dysfunctional family, and my neighborhood was a dysfunctional community. And so we did what we knew best. We was in survival mode, and we would, every day we would do what we could to survive, and just the thought of thriving overwhelmed us. We was living day by day. So imagine growing up in a community where you had to pull yourself up all the way up to the equal playing field of just being a basic human being, and treated with the quality of life. And then imagine have to do more, the exhaustion that goes into trying to thrive in that community. It's been a challenge. And so we started the Ross Foundation in 2014, and we set out on this, our vision is to end poverty. We knew that we could not just put Band-Aids on things. We want to heal the wound. So we focus on in mental health, housing, food insecurity, education, and outreach. We're the biggest grassroots organization in the state of Indiana, and marking on our 10-year anniversary next year. And we've been doing the work, meeting people where they are. And, we founded the Indiana Tenant Association, a statewide housing housing organization that tackles housing injustice, because we knew that housing is healthcare. Housing is interconnected to every social determinants of health, and you cannot tackle mental health without tackling housing. You cannot tackle food insecurity without tackling housing. You cannot tackle quality education without tackling housing. And so many other barriers and challenges is all interconnected. And we saw that we have to change laws and also stand in the gap at the same time. And so that's a little bit about the Ross Foundation and what we do. And I could talk more later.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dee, and congrats on the decade anniversary coming up, too, as well, for your organization. So, and then we'll go ahead and have Maddie joining us virtually go next. If you want to go ahead, Maddie, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you so much for having me here today. I hear an echo there. Am I okay? Can you guys hear?
We can hear you okay. Are you able to?
Oh, yeah, I'm good. It was just an echo in the background there and stuff. I just want to make sure I'm not good. But my name is Maddie Berry Evans, and I've been working with Mercy Housing for the last 12 to 13 years. And I have lived experience with housing instability. Pretty much is more of a housing, adequate housing. Um, and we here at Mercy Housing, I think affordable housing is really important to kind of have tenants and the residents organized for the Resident Action Project. And that's what we are part of. We've been part of the Action Project since April of 2020, and that was just the beginning of COVID. So it's pretty interesting how that was going. But like I said, that I have lived experience myself for the adequate housing. When I was growing up, I was in housing, but it wasn't adequate because I grew up in a rural area in Georgia, and um, it's just that infrastructure wasn't set up for us to have, the running water that we need and inside toilets and, electricity and different things like that. So it was a little challenging, but as a community, we came together, embraced it, and kind of made some changes um, and did things where we all can have some quality of life. So, yeah, but I enjoy working here at Mercy Housing and affordable housing, and we also have reached out to other affordable housing um, facilities for them also to have the resident action project, because I think the tenant and resident organizing is so important and critical in making things change for us. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Maddie, and thank you for your critical work with the Residents Adjunct Project in Washington, also known as RAP. So if you hear me say RAP moving forward, that's what that stands for. And last but not least, Taylor, if you want to go ahead and share a little bit more about yourself and the work that you do.
Hi, I'm Taylor Newell. I'm the founder and executive director of Who Speaks for Me. Who Speaks for Me is an organization I actually designed while I was incarcerated, and I never intended it to be a standalone because there's so many nonprofits in the world. But when I came home, no one would partner with me. So here I am today, running my own nonprofit, and I came to the housing piece trial by fire. You know, I don't have a story of being unhoused, although housing insecurity when I was growing up, but I went into foster care when I was 14, was on that trajectory, although I didn't know it, to incarceration, even though I went to college and all those things. You know, my ACEs were really high, adverse childhood experiences. But housing became an issue for me when I came home from prison. And prior to incarceration, in my adult life, I'd never been homeless. I'd not lived a impoverished lifestyle or anything like that. But prison makes you poor unless you have a family to come home to. And I actually had a housing voucher through the Department of Behavioral Health because I have post-traumatic stress disorder complex. And the voucher is slated to be way below the market rate, right? So it was created in 2010. I got the voucher in 2015. And to this day, it's still $1,235. If you know anything about DC, you can't even get a room and a house in DC for that amount. So I was relegated to living in all kinds of substandard violent housing. And I had trouble getting my nonprofit off the ground. I had trouble getting employment. And through the course of a lot of things, I ended up in a tax credit building, Park 7. If you Google Park 7 Tenants Fight Back, you'll see what I started doing. The building was not maintained. Chris Donatelli is a slumlord. You can tell him I said it. And he had us living in really bad conditions. This building was built in 2014. It is completely in disrepair. I started the Tenant organization with the help of Empire DC, which is an amazing local nonprofit that does a lot with housing developments and things like that. And they came out to our meeting, and I had already decided that we were going to have Park 7 Tenants Fight Back. That was going to be our handle. And let me tell you, I had an impact. You know, the mayor's office started listening, the Office of Attorney General started listening, and Chris Donatelli started listening. That was a bad thing for me. I ended up getting assaulted by the security guard. They called the police on me. In a year's time, they called the police on me 30 times. And because I had a voucher from the Department of Housing, they knew that I had a mental illness. In DC, they call it an FD-12. They tried to involuntarily commit me 3 times. 3 times they tried to do this. That's the collateral consequences of having multiple marginalized identities. I'm a person who's a returning citizen, I'm a person with disability, and I'm queer, and obviously I'm Black, and I'm a cisgender female. I am told that I need to sit down and be quiet, and that I need to take what I need to get, right? But that's not who I am. The same person I am today on the streets is the advocate I was in prison. And the same trouble I have on the streets is the same trouble I had in prison. I don't know how to keep my mouth shut, right? And I'm never gonna keep my mouth shut. I just decided that. And I have a potty mouth, but it's lit, so I'm not cussing. That being said, you know, the work at Park 7 really showed me that, you know, this is terrible. And I left from there and went to another tax credit building. The building was great, but the neighborhood was violent, and someone pulled a gun on me. And then I started looking for housing, and I'll get into this later about how I'm buying my house now. And, you know, it just showed me that housing is the key to our success, period. No matter where you find yourself in life, having a home, and not just a place to live, but a place to call a home, makes a huge difference in how we move in this society. And we started Housing for All, and it was based largely on someone that I did time with. I did 4.5 years. She did 33 years. Her name is Mary. She went in at 22, came home at 55. We provided her with her first apartment on her own in November. We have funding for a project called Housing for All. We started with 5 returning citizens. It's going to be scaled next year to 10. And then around DC in years 4 and 5, we're scaling it nationally. And so that's who I am. And there will be more to come later. And I thank you all for being here. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Taylor, and thank you again, everybody, for introducing yourselves. And so we'll go ahead and just get into the questions that we have prepared for today now. And the first one will actually be for Maddie. Maddie, so I think I told you this already, but when I first learned about your advocacy work through a Shelter Force article, actually, that was kind of just highlighting what led you to get involved with RAP and about like your upbringing in rural Georgia. And so the question that I have for you today is, can you share with us a little bit about why it's important to remember where we came from in order to impact, you know, any policy change or just change in the future that we want to see?
Again, thank you for having me here, Ms. Bennett. So yeah, I grew up in rural Georgia, just a little bit of history. I grew up in rural Georgia in the 60s. I came from a really large family, and we did a lot of farming and everything. And it was not so many opportunities for African American in the rural area that I came from. So we uh, really connected through our Baptist church. This was the foundation for me, actually, learning how to help others and work with others. I My experience in the church and the community have really impacted what I do today in the and that have a really impact on what's happening in my current community and workplace. Like I was saying earlier in our introduction and stuff, we, experienced, we had housing, but it was just really inadequate and stuff. It wasn't really a good situation, but nevertheless, we just had the housing. But when through the church and everything, we was able to connect with people and do everything and make life a little bit better. Um, and even now, what we are doing with the resident action project is just, meeting people where they are. We do all kinds of events and do different things so that way we can meet people where they are and make their life a little bit better by providing food resources and transportation, medical resources, education, and just a listening ear to support them. But most of all, we provide uh, them with housing resources. Housing is, oh God, it just, I can't say enough about housing, why it's so important to have it and everything. And I always add adequate housing, because adequate housing is stability, and adequate housing is a human right. I really feel that way. And with the tenants and residents here at Mercy Housing, I'm so glad that they was able to give us a platform and we was able to um, organize here for the RAP program here. And if the people that don't know what the Resident Action Project is people come together to take action on affordable housing and homelessness issues. And most of the people here in affordable housing have had some housing instability. In all my experience and stuff, that's why it's important to remember where you came from. It has a great impact on how you get out to serve and how much energy and stuff you have around that. And I have so much energy and motivation to make changes and change policies and stuff. So making sure that each and every person have an opportunity for adequate housing. Um, Here in Washington, a lot of people been priced out of homes, and it's just not okay to do that. And some people don't have, some of the landlords are not so great towards keeping up maintenance things and different things like that. And we fight to make sure that people have those things, and landlords, step up and do the things they need to do, as well as the residents and tenants of the facilities to make sure that they're doing their extra part so they can have quality of life and they can thrive, because it's important to have that. So I can't speak enough as where I came from and everything like that. And I remember that, and I just don't want anyone else to go through that. And that's why I do the things I do. And we, as a resident service coordinator here, advocate for all affordable housing to have programs similar to the Resident Action Project to um, to make sure that they have a voice, and because people with lived experience feel they're expert in this thing and whatever they're doing and support each other. So yeah, I it does make a difference, and it does impact change quite a bit when you can remember where you came from, for sure.
Thank
And
you.
thank you.
Oh, sorry, Maddie. Thank you so much for sharing that information. And I forgot to note this at the beginning, but Maddie will have to leave us like right at 5. So if you're thinking about questions for Maddie, please feel free to come to the front at the beginning. That way we can make sure we get to those questions. But the next question is going to be for Taylor, who I actually met through a coworker because Taylor invited her to come speak on a panel. And I actually got to meet Mary, which Taylor just mentioned earlier, who was incarcerated for quite a long time. And so in that event, I kind of just learned more about like the reentry work that Taylor did, working with women and members of the LGBTQ plus community, and I just wanted to learn a little bit more, Taylor, about like how lived experience can really make a difference when you're leading an organization like yours.
You know, lived experience, our stories are is data. You don't know what you're looking for if you don't have the stories. And I find that as a person with lived experience in multiple arenas, that making people understand that the story is at the heart of any movement, any change, any policy work, right? And so as a person with lived experience with mental illness, a survivor of all kinds of abuse, trauma, of the foster care system, experiencing homelessness when I came home, and of course living in the dilapidated places I've lived in, the more multiple marginalized identities you have, the harder it is to succeed in this society. It's really hard to talk about not feeling unsafe, because when you have marginalized identities and you are a person who's deemed less than in society, it means that when you step out and bring attention to yourself, things can happen. And it was an unsafe thing. In fact, when I left Park 7, and they paid me heavily to leave, when I left Park 7, I didn't want to leave until I got the money, but I couldn't get the money until I left, right? So I was looking for a place, and some people stepped in and said, we will house you for free. You can bring your dog, because I have a service animal. And so I left because I was arrested, and I caught a criminal charge. And 10 officers burst into my house, pulled a gun on my dog, stepped on my head, and it was a misdemeanor crime that they said I did. Eventually, 3 years, the charges were dropped. But that was really scary. And Parisa from Empower DC said, if you don't leave there, you're going to either catch another charge and go back to prison for some time, or they're going to kill you. And it was that frightening. And so I can tell you this, speaking out is the way to be safe, right? Like, shame, when things are happening to us, when people are oppressing us, abusing us, we internalize a lot of shame about that, right? And for me, of course, it's like, oh, people are gonna say I brought this on myself, right? But I found that when I went public with it, like I shared video from my Ring doorbell calendar, I literally installed a Ring doorbell on my apartment door so that I could show how often the police were coming to my house. And I shared that on social media so that people came and joined me and said, you know, we want to fight for this. We want to fight for this person. I learned through my first trial and going to prison is that when I did things in a silo, it's when bad things happen. So as far as safety goes, the louder you are, bring people with you. Sit down with people in your community. Let them know that you need their help and their support. Tap into those resources of people who have the resources, who aren't marginalized, who want to walk with you as an ally, but also protect you. When I say who speaks for me, it's because at times we can't speak for ourselves because people don't want to hear from us. So that's one of the things I can tell you. And I have navigated so many systems, DBH housing, the core service providers for mental health in DC. On a national level, I've looked at things, and it means that I have a lot of information that we've slowly been trying to pull out of my head, right, and put into different databases. Burnout is real. And I will tell you that for me, I hit a brick wall after I left Park 7 and then again during COVID because it felt like it was so much to do, so many people to help, and I didn't have the resources. I was helping people find housing and get things they needed during COVID, and I was living in abject poverty. I had a voucher. This was just 3 years ago, right? And I have to say that the community, again, I had to be open and say, I'm feeling like I can't go on. And someone said, I'm not going to give you money, just give you money. I'm going to get you a hotel at the Jefferson because you'll have to go. And I'm going to pay them directly for you to get a massage because you'll just take the money and give it away, right? And that was part of it, just having that people know that I was hitting a wall. And I think the other thing is that now that we're up and we're running, I'm going to Puerto Rico next month because I don't get a day off, right? So I'm using the resources to take care of myself while I take care of others. And the other thing I would say, again, about being unsafe, don't be afraid to tell somebody. You know, I went to the mayor's office. I went to the council members. I published things publicly. I wrote blogs. You know, I want people to know. You know, you can Google me all you want. I Google me all the time. I know exactly what it says. That has nothing to do with the work that I'm doing right now, right? It has nothing to do with the systems that I'm trying to tear down and things that I'm trying to build up. And so I think that when you put yourself out there, you're going to have detractors. Do you know Mother Teresa's anyway poem, what you build up today, someone will tear down tomorrow, right? And you just have to say to yourself, this isn't a competition between me and anybody else. This is between me and my universe, me and my God. This is between me and my calling. And if you feel that calling, if you feel called to do that, then you have to just step out in your truth and say, things are going to come that I don't like. And you put that stuff aside and you just keep moving forward. And I can tell you, it's not easy. It's absolutely not easy. But at the end of the day, you can close your eyes and say, I like the person that I am today. And you can wake up the next day and say, not only do I like the person I am, I like the way that I'm moving in this world.
Yes, a round of applause. That's really inspirational. Thank you so much, Taylor. And then I'm going to go ahead and just move to the next question, which is for Dee. And Dee, you have like a wide knowledge on just organizing in general, and you started organizing originally like in your own neighborhood and community, but then you've also kind of moved that towards city organizing and city advocacy through the Indianapolis Tenant Rights Union, and now you're looking into statewide advocacy by forming the Indiana Tenants Association. So can you tell us more about what prompted you to make that shift, or how you're still kind of juggling all three of them?
Yeah, I have a few things. First of all, I'd like to start off with the main reason is when I was 5, I was molested for 3 years and never really dealt with that trauma until I turned 18. And right after that, I have a disability too. So you won't never know I have a disability unless I tell you. I have 2 chronic lung diseases, and I had respiratory lung failure twice, one in 2018 and one in 2022. And also just being a person of color, a black African American. Imagine just one of them alone. You think, look at the statistics. People with high percentages of mental illnesses don't have access to affordable, habitable living, housing. And then you think about disabilities. It's hard for people with disabilities to find equitable housing. And you just think about disproportionately black and brown people are impacted the most by this pandemic. And they don't have access before this. They didn't have access prior to the pandemic to affordable housing. So we could talk about putting affordable housing and create more affordable housing all we want. But until we close the empty box that's keeping people from falling through the cracks, because it's deeper than just access to affordable housing. We got to address systemic poverty. We have to address systemic racism, and we have to address systematic oppression. And so that leads me to my first story is in 2016, I got a call in the middle of the night that an entire apartment complex was out of water. And when I went, this was my first time dealing with any type of situation around housing. And when I went to the area, it was a Section 8 community. And they was paying their water bill that was included part of their rent. But the apartment complex, the property management group, failed to pay the water bill. And so therefore, all of their water was cut off for 2 days. And most of those households had 3 to 4 children residing in each of those households. And so what I did was did a call to action in my community and said, we need to raise as much water as possible and get it over here. And so what we did was we raised over thousands of cases of water within 4 hours. and went over there and passed out cases of water. And you can look up this story on the news. You can look up the Ross Foundation, and you can say water crisis. You'll find a story. But we passed out the water inside the homes, meeting people where they are. But when we went inside the homes, we saw it was a deeper issue that needed to be addressed. Most of those houses, apartments, had mold and feces growing on their walls. The ceilings was caved in where you could see the pipes. When it rained, it would create more like mold, but mushrooms was growing on their walls. It was places with no doorknobs, no windows, and they haven't had a maintenance team in over a year. And the property manager was using drugs. And so a lot of residents was taken advantage of because they was not properly paying their rent as well. They was paying it in the form of cash as well. And so imagine for a couple of days, these are children breathing in mold, with mold in the system, breathing in feces. But also when you come outside those walls, you're exposed to violence in your community, infested with drugs, infested with so many different illegal activities, prostitution, sex trafficking, human trafficking. But we didn't have anyone there to see them. No elected official, no mayor, no state rep, no local community centers. No one was speaking out about the injustice that was happening in this community. And so what we did was we did a call to action. We organized all the tenants, and we found the owners. It was hard finding the owners because the owners were not local bound. They were out of the state, and they would not return our phone calls. We had all the tenants leave messages, hundreds of calls that day. And we never got anything in return until we brought the news out there, and we exposed them, and we told them all the different things that we demanded from them, because they was like, man, look, we don't want any bad press. What can we do to resolve this issue quickly? Because I also found their personal Facebook pages and tagged the owners and found the right name because they was hiding behind third parties. And we had every person, whether they was a tenant or not, in the city of Indianapolis, tagging them and exposing them. And so they hurry up and called back. And I demanded three things. First, you guys cut back on the water bill, pay the bare minimum to get the utilities back on. And so they did that. The second thing was to fire the property manager, who has been taking advantage of these tenants, and they did that. And the third was either renovate or sell this property. And so within 3 weeks of all of this call to action, they sold the property. And the next people that came in, I demanded a letter signed that they were committed to renovating the property. And they did renovate the property, and people have been living in more sufficient apartments as of today. And so based off of that, the following year, we passed an ordinance for locally that tenants should be informed of their rights, a part of their lease. But the state passed a law doing the complete opposite, which allowed landlords to continue to abuse tenants and not inform them of their rights. And so this was following the pandemic, in the middle of the pandemic. And what I got inspired by is a mother I was working with locally. She was an elderly black mother who took full custody of her grandchildren, and because the daughter was murdered, and she couldn't go to work anymore because her grandchildren were sick, and they wasn't allowed to go to daycare anymore, and so she had to take off of work. and she didn't have any PTO hours or anything like that. It's just minimum wage job, and she was eventually let go after a week of missing work. And from that, she was evicted from her home a few weeks later for missing rent, and then a couple weeks later, she caught COVID-19, and then a week later she died, and so that made me think, okay, what needs to happen to change laws to get in this fight, and because Indianapolis is number 2 in evictions filing behind New York City. We are one of 5 states that still says you cannot withhold rent, even if you live in inhabitable living conditions. We are the first tenant union to ever exist in the state of Indiana, and I'm 32 years of age. And we realized that there's only so much we could do on the city level. We have to organize every 92 counties, all 92 counties into action. And we realized that it was a housing crisis that Indiana was in, not just in the urban communities, but in the rural communities and small towns, and that we needed, in order to change laws, we have to organize across the state. And so we hosted our second year Housing Advocacy Day at the State House, where we had almost 200 residents across the state advocating for real change and sharing their stories and providing a platform they never had. And so that will prompt me to go statewide, because we know that's what the real work is. We have to change laws and legislation, but also and it has to be led by people with lived experience.
Thank you so much, Dee. And you actually made the perfect segue into the next question that I wanted to ask you, which is for Taylor. And I think just listening to all 3 of you share your experiences and your stories, we can see how you've had to navigate through several systems of oppression where you've faced discrimination on all intersections of your identity, whether that be your race, your gender, your class, ability, sexual orientations, etc. But we know, and we've seen the statistics that, Black people and people of color are usually the ones that are disproportionately impacted by the housing shortage in the United States, as well as the high cost. And we also see that a lot of the tenants, leading these movements across the country are also Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And I know you touched on this a little bit earlier too, Taylor, but I do just want to give you the opportunity to dive deeper into what guidance you would provide to these folks who are experiencing oppression at the hands of the system, who are feeling the effects of being unsafe or being burnt out or discouraged.
Again, building community. And, can you imagine designing a program while you're in prison? And I was a development consultant before I went to prison, so I know nonprofits inside and out, and I did capacity building and manage major donors. But you come home and nobody wants to engage with you, right? But you look around and the people who are engaging with you are those who are most in need, right? And I think for me, and I think this happens to a lot of leaders, is that people don't see where you struggle, right? There's this sort of, if you talk to my family, there are all these urban myths about me. None of them are true. But I think there's this way of romanticizing our leaders, especially those of us that are leading from lived experience. And I think it's important to own. I used to share my story all the time. I don't delve so much into it, like my trauma and things like that, because I don't want it to be the Taylor show. But I will say that was part of getting me stable and sharing my story. I mean, we have a whole program, if you go to our website, which has some problems right now. But if you go to our website, you'll see that we have a whole program called Sharing Our Stories to Reclaim Our Lives, right? And I can tell you that that's the thing. Find people that you can sit with and share your stories, right? Figure out, I literally sometimes just sit in my house. And I know no one's going to believe this, but I really don't like people. I'm actually quite the introvert. So I sit in my house with my dog, and I'll just sit. I'll just sit in solitude, right? There's something about just saying, today I don't have to fix anything. Today I don't have to fix anybody, and I need to take that time. Because when I leave this today, when I go home, I have to get myself back together because it takes a lot to put yourself out here. Like listening to share his story, that, you know, that's a lot. It's a lot for the audience, for you all who are listening, but it's a lot for him as well, right? And I'm glad your wife is here because, you know, when you leave here, I always call them trauma hangovers. And that's the thing, giving yourself space to deal with your trauma hangover. This work exposes us to so much trauma, and it causes us to relive a lot of our trauma if we're leading from lived experience. And so for me, I appreciate the solitude because you don't know lack of solitude until you go to prison. It's never quiet. It's not even quiet at night when people are supposedly sleeping. There is always chaos and noise. And so I think that when we lead, we also are in those chaotic spaces, especially during COVID. So you guys remember everyone was like doing mutual aid. Those of us that didn't have to go into work because our offices had closed down, we were really trying to figure out how to give and to be in this, right? But it was a lot. It was a lot of noise. It was a lot of chaos. It was a lot of building systems. And as Dee said, you know, homelessness didn't come about because of COVID. It just exposed the problem, right? And so, again, I'll just say for me, it's finding out what works for me, like sitting with myself and saying, what do I need? Also, I'm in therapy. I've been in therapy since I came home from prison. I meet with my therapist once a week, and I take medication. Don't shy away from medication if you need it. I mean, depression is real in this work, and sometimes it's just situational, and sometimes it just takes its toll on you. If you have that time where you wake up in the morning and you're like, I really don't want to get out of bed today. If you don't have toddlers and you don't have a dog, stay in the bed, right? Like, there's no rule that you have to get out there every day and do something. Take that time for yourself and really try to be in community with people who you can just call and say, I'm having a really bad day today, and I just need someone to hold space for me, right? For me, I don't want to talk to people when I'm feeling like that. So, you know, and just setting your limits and your boundaries, and that you don't have to be a superhero, right? I mean, we're just human, right? We might take off our vests with an S on our chest, but in reality, we're really, really just people trying to make this a just and equitable society, and housing is, I believe, is at the core of that.
Yeah, and thank you for the Alicia Keys reference. I needed that too. I don't know how much time we'll have left, but just for the sake of time, I'll keep us moving to the next question that I had for Maddie, which is kind of more tailored to your work with RAP, Maddie, and how, you know, you've seen like a lot of victories kind of just happen statewide in Washington state, and passing the statewide right to counsel law. So can you tell us a little bit more about the work that took place to make sure that that legislation passed, and how this resident-led movement really prepared tenants for statewide advocacy?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say is that Washington State became the first state to guarantee lawyers for low-income tenants during eviction, and that's what they were talking about with their right of counsel bill and everything. And our governor signed that bill in April 2021, and that was really, really huge because the right to counsel further racial, economical, and social justice while helping to address the extreme imbalance of power between landlords and tenants. So we kind of set the stage for the other states to know what they need to do to get it done, because we definitely need those right to counsel laws there for people that low income tenants and residents. So just want to put that out there. And what we did here for Resident Action Project, we did a lot of virtual weekly meetings on Thursdays to help with that process. We also held phone banks, calling in and telling people, please, check in and advocate for that, for the right to counsel. We also kind of, want to make sure that people was voting too, and so we did some voting registration events. This was all in COVID period. In storytelling, we did storytelling events, and we did some videos. We made videos so that way we can kind of share them with our legislators and everything. And we provided education, advocacy programs, and support education so that way our tenants, residents, community members would know what that means on our right to counsel. And we did a lot of talking to our legislators during our annual Housing and Homelessness Advocacy Day event. Um, and we also made sure that we deal with so many different populations and everything. We also did the want everyone involved, so we made sure that interpretation was a piece in that. We want to make sure that the language people understood and everything, and so that way they can help us advocate and promote this right to counsel policy. Um, we also, like I said, advocacy thing, doing training on building and taking back power because it's so important for the tenants to do that. We did all of this thing. This was, like I said, really in the middle of COVID, and it was just how amazing our tenants and residents and community members came together with that. Like I said, I'm the resident service coordinator, and one of my main jobs is bringing programs to our facility and everything. And I still say again that we really need more affordable housing organizations to kind of bring this type of program to their facilities or some form or some level so that way tenants can have a platform to make sure they organize and get different policy change because it's critical. It's just really critical to do that. Um, and since that time and everything, since that change, it kind of have slowed down evictions, and which is really important because, like I said, housing is a human right in my mind, and also it is stability for residents as well as all community members, all people to stay stable because they need that home and they can for sure for their mental health will be stable, their health care will be stable. It just number one, and we want to make sure we put that out there so people can fully understand. But those are some of the things that we did to make sure and advocate for the right to counsel um, bill that did pass for sure.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Maddie. And we do have Rachel Myers from the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance in the audience too. So I just wanted to make sure that you had an ally in the room who also worked on the right to counsel advocacy with you as well. And I can see you down here in case y'all see me looking down. Yeah, it's like going back and forth. But the last targeted question that I have is for Dee, actually, who I noted earlier was part of the Hoosiers for Housing group and I think that group was also a part of the Indiana Housing Task Force, which really aimed to just make sure that Indiana legislators were creating more equitable housing policy. And can you just share a little bit more about your experience on this task force? If I'm correct, it was like a statewide task force, and you were one of the few that was not only non-elected, but also non-developer, and also as a Black man, one of the few folks who fell within that category in that group.
Yeah, I was the Indiana Housing Task Force was a collective action of developers, landlords, in different municipalities. I was the only Black man that has, one of the first Black men that was a non-elected official to be on the Indiana Housing Task Force. So it was all white people who's usually at the table. And this is our first time the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition had a seat at the table. And what came with me was lived experiences, authenticity. And it's a difference between sharing quantitative data, but actually sharing the real stories, actually bringing people to share those stories of people. A lot of those lab reports don't always capture those stories. And so usually when you're meeting with elected officials, it's both necessary, don't get me wrong, but it's imperative to have stories at the table to back up the data. If you do not have the stories at the table, then the data is useless. But we did collectively. It was hard to put together different suggestions and recommendations for legislators to pass. And at the end, we thought we came collectively to the best suitable plan to transform the state of Indiana. Now, when session came, when General Assembly came around the following months, all the recommendations that we had for our organization had for tenant protections was shot down. Every recommendation that the Builders Association and the apartment associations and the landlord realtor associations were strongly considered, and some of them passed through legislation. Now, one win that we did get was utilities. When a landlord does not pay their utilities, the state will pay the local electric company, water company, or any utility company up to 4 months until that landlord or property manager takes care of their utilities. Then after those 4 months, even though it's not a real win, then we have to go back to the basis of if that property manager or landlord is going to continue to pay their rent, pay their utilities on time. So we do have a bill that is passed for that. Outside of that, we have not really made a dent to creating a tenant bill of rights or protecting our tenants. But we have picked up with steam and having more conversations. This is the biggest movement we ever had as far as advocacy work around tenant rights. And so, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing, Dee. And I do just have like a quick follow-up for you for that question as well. But can you just tell us a little bit more about how storytelling in connection with the data as well was a big change maker in your advocacy?
Yeah, I think the lady who presented, I think yesterday, she said the people with the pain have the solution. And so if the people who are directly impacted the most are not at the decision-making table, then, we really just spinning in circles. Because if you think about every recommendation that local elected officials or state representatives or senators has recommended has never worked in Indiana, because they never consulted with the people who's directly impacted. They created programs and policies and gave money to community centers who don't even come outside their four walls because it was an easy fix. It was an easy thing to just pass on to them without have to figure out tracing the financial auditing and all of that. It was easy just when you got the CARE Act dollars to pass it to the community centers and depend on them to disperse the rental assistance. Well, most of those community centers during the pandemic, doors was closed. So the people who's directly impacted are not coming in between your four walls. They don't have transportation. They don't have access to internet, Wi-Fi. How would they even know about the services you offer? And so it has been a disconnect. And our organization has been the bridge for that, bringing those stories to the table, to the forefront, and making sure all of this work is centered around people with lived experiences. Without the storytelling, you can never really resonate or humanize with just the data. It's a different feeling when that person sit across from you and saying, like, I don't have nowhere else to go. The shelters is full, overcrowded. And so this is what it's going to take for anyone who's doing this type of work, we have to reach the people that's directly impacted the most. That means we have to go in the trenches, the areas that is not recommended for you to step into. Those are the areas you have to go into.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And then I'll go ahead and just ask a question of all of the panelists before we open it up to the audience to ask some questions, so get those ready. But for all our panelists here today, if we can just share a little bit about how you've been using the growth and success that you've seen so far in your current work to fuel victories down the road. And I know, Maddie, you have to leave in a few minutes, so if you want to go first, and then we can go ahead and let you leave for the day. But if you want to follow up, folks, I can put you in touch with Maddie. Oh, we can't hear you.
Yeah, I just had to come off mute. I'm so sorry.
No worries.
And everything. So can you ask that again? I'm sorry. I just had someone in the office.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Oh, to ask the question again. Thank you so much. How you've been using the growth and success of your current work to fuel victories down the road in the future.
Yeah. So here at Mercer Housing and stuff, we continue to advocate and do outreach to get more and more affordable housing agencies involved. Because I know that the more people that we have, it's gonna bring more power. We can be more power doing that, and I think that I think it was Dee was saying that people with the lived experience and stuff, they are the experts, and we need to do a lot of direct consulting with them and making sure that we're hearing their voice and stuff, because they're the ones that help us make the best decisions in my mind, so we can go forward for sure. So that's what we have been doing. We really trying to get the other agencies, housing agencies, involved in helping us do this work and do the outreach and helping us talk to legislators and making those policy changes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maddie, and thank you for joining us too, in case you have to hop off soon, but thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. And then I'll go ahead and ask the same question of our other two panelists. How have you been using the growth and success of your current work to fuel victories down the road? And Taylor, if you want to go first, because I know Dee just spoke.
Sorry, I know we have to keep this on so they can hear us on the. So one of our biggest successes is getting the funding from a private foundation to start our Housing for All. And Housing for All is not just housing. We actually lease the apartments in DC. We pay up to $2,500 a month. We furnish the apartments with our clients. They get to pick out the furniture. We give them a stipend of $100 in cash a week. We pay their cell phone bills for a year. The housing is free for a year. We connect them with other services, mental health, substance use disorder, life skills, financial literacy. Financial literacy is a big one. And like one of our clients, we're connecting her with a nutritionist just to help with shopping and things like that. So we don't just give housing, we make it a home and give you the services to succeed. So based on that, and I'm in the housing, the enterprise community had a whole working group for the Mid-Atlantic region for people who are doing housing for returning citizens. And that ended today, our working group, which is perfect for this. And one of the things that I've done is created a working group on Housing for All to take that model of what we're doing and to sort of, it's a twist on permanent supportive housing, right? Like it's beyond permanent supportive housing, right? Because it's not enough just to give someone a voucher or give them a housing. There are lots of things that come with that, especially if you're a returning citizen. And so we've started a working group locally, and we're going to build out nationally. We want to take this model and put it into other housing models. So I was really steadfast on, I don't want a building that they can say, oh, that's where people who went to prison live, right? But somebody said, but Taylor, some people want to live in community with people who've been through what they've been through, right? I don't. I have no desire to live with people I went to prison with. No desire. Some people want to live in communities with other queer people or what have you who've been impacted by the criminal justice system. So, and some people want to live with each other. So we're taking that model and we're building it out so that housing for all really means that. Someone said to me, Taylor, agency means you have opportunities, right? And so those opportunities can't be limited by my experience. I had so many bad experiences with the reentry house and none of it was positive. And so I was like, oh, I want to redo those things. I want to get rid of them. And I've realized that actually we can just take this model and incorporate it into all aspects of what housing for returning citizens looks like. So that's what I see down the road. I see this as a national project. It's starting locally, but we're gonna do this. In 5 years, you're gonna be hearing about housing for all everywhere you go.
Thank you so much, Taylor. And Dee, if you want to go ahead and wrap us up for that question.
Absolutely. I would say that, as a Black-led nonprofit organization, we deal with a lot of philanthropic inequities. I don't want to go down into that rabbit hole, but recently we just received $700,000 for housing, for tackling housing advocacy and mental health. We have the first Black-owned mental health and wellness center on the east side of Indianapolis, where we do things through a holistic lens. We have art therapy, reading therapy, music therapy, healing circles, and we have our own community garden, our own urban agriculture program. And launching statewide, we have seen a lot of support, a lot of counties pouring out to us, and we realize that it's more work to do, that we may have received $700,000 as a start, but it's not enough. And we realize that we have leveraged our presence in the state of Indiana now that every news outlet, that's one advice I give everyone, leverage your news outlets in the local and state level because they follow everything we do. And so now when the health department is not getting back with a tenant or pro bono services who are claiming to represent tenants, who sending tenants through, jumping through hoops just to get help, or never hear from them for months. When they CC our organization, it's more of a rapid response now. And so we have leveraged that ability to hold people accountable and make sure that these tenants are getting the resources and services they deserve. And then we also have launched a pilot program where we have installed an app in the local gas stations, looking to install an app into the local gas stations and laundromats and different churches, because the church is on every block in the community, and to help bridge the gap with access to resources and services so you could utilize it like an ATM. I mean, they standing outside. People are standing outside gas stations anyway. Imagine if they could go inside and get access to the resources they are actually looking for. And so that's what we've been doing, and that's why I asked that question to Matthew is, what's the plan like to bridge the gap in reaching the people who's directly impacted the most? You can have all the books, you can have all the wraparound services for people to go to, but if you're not reaching the people that closest to the pain, then it doesn't really make a difference. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. And I'm going to go ahead and have my colleague help me out with any audience questions. I think I saw this one over here in the corner go first, and then we'll take the one in the back, and then we'll go to John, and then we'll go to you.
Well, thank you so much. I'm incredibly inspired by the work you're doing. So well done. I run a homeless emergency shelter program in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm speaking tomorrow on criminalization efforts. But sustainability is always a challenge for all of us. And by tapping, I think, into the faith community, like the housing for all, maybe faith community churches could adopt folks as their own and help them for a year. Maybe you're already doing something like that. But I did want to share in Phoenix, Arizona, there's a local ordinance that allows the church community, they can build, it's either 10 or 12 units without having to get any kind of zoning on their property. So there's a major conversation and effort underfoot, and we want to be a part of that, whether it's tiny homes or whatever kind of housing. and also affordable housing, and this may be going on around the country, but a lot of the churches that are struggling are seeing affordable housing, including partnerships with Mercy Housing and others, as a way for them to have income. So I just wanted to share that because we're really exploring that, and I want to see, your programs become sustainable. We always struggle with that. I happen to be a really good fundraiser, and it built sustainability over the last 5.5 years with my agency. So it's always on my mind, but kudos to your work. I guess there's not really a question in there other than have you thought about the faith community as funding partners too, to leverage?
Yeah, so definitely we have. So it looks different. The faith community looks different in different cities. You have some churches that's heavily grassroots involved in the community, but some of the churches on the east side of Indianapolis don't even come outside their four walls, and they move into the community, kind of like what that video is watching. Where Matthew is talking about the church moving into a community while asking the community. Similar concept where you have an area that is impoverished. Some churches look at it as an opportunity to relocate their church and take over, but they never invest back into the community on that side of town. And so that's been an issue. And what I'm doing is creating a platform that can utilize how can we restore that and beautify our communities, because now you guys are you added to the eyesores that's already existing in our in our communities, and you need to be a part of the solution.
I have actually steered away from faith-based, largely because the community that we serve, when we're dealing with LGBTQ plus, there's a lot of trauma from faith-based. So I've steered away from it. But if a church comes to us and they have not just the welcoming, but like, we are open, we accept all, and they want to partner with us, that's fine. But I've largely steered clear of that. Go ahead.
So I belong to a very progressive church. I joined recently. That's how, because their reverend wanted to know about affordable housing, and so it's First Church, it's a UCC. So,
I love UCC.
Yeah, those progressive churches want to be part of the solution.
Oh, yeah, I know.
And maybe one of the things that's being talked about in Arizona, what if we had statewide allowance for the churches to build 10 to 12 units by right without having to zone, putting housing, and no one's going to ask. I mean, that's one of the things actually I think that can happen to address some of the unsheltered.
Yeah, also in DC, if you look around, we don't have a lot of land. So that would, but one of my board members, our treasurer, Megan Young, is a UCC pastor. So it's not like it's out of the question. I know they're liberal churches, but we just haven't, we've just had again, scattered housing, things like that is what we're doing.
Yeah, and back to the lived experience too. I think like if folks have had like trauma with churches before, I think it's important to consider that too before diving into those relationships. I saw a question in the back with the suit and I think the pink shirt under. Yeah, of
course. Thank you guys for this session. I really appreciate it. Like, lived experience is very important. So we're from New Jersey, and we work. It's called the Housing and Community Development Network of New Jersey. And so my neighbor, she just started working here. So she's my neighbor turned coworker, and we do a lot of stuff on like with the governor and the state legislator and municipalities, right? But in our particular housing unit, right, there's a lot of issues, right? And so we were thinking about starting a tenant organization for either our street or just our building, right? We came with a cool name like ETAs, the East Hanover Tenant Association or whatever. But we're kind of like, because we have a 9 to 5 and we do other things outside of our work day, we don't know how to start, like how to like what are the basic things of starting a tenant organization in a building, or how should we knock on doors, or what should we say, how should we utilize the lived experience, or like the storytelling, different things like that. So like my question to you guys is, how can we, like, what should we do to start our building tenant organization or ETA?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I first started our Indianapolis Tenant Rights Union, it was just me doing all the advocacy work until I started going door to door, doing door to door canvassing and just talking to residents, enrolling them into the vision. Because if you're a resident, it doesn't matter if you're living in an apartment or you renting a home. It doesn't matter. Like, we all are impacted one way or another around this housing crisis. So it really comes down to your pitch. Going door to door, engaging folks, and you'll see the team pick up. And every month, more people got engaged, more got involved. We even got on the news, talked about what we're doing, and the goal of we put our contact information out. We had a lot of people come out from that, but also went to PTO meetings in schools, talked to a lot of parents, especially in the public school setting. And we also we engaged everyone. We did outreach on the corners. We set up booths, kind of like you see that free cell phone booth. But we just educating people on their rights. And so when we started educating people on their rights, people was like, "Wow, like I wish I would have had this 4 or 5 years ago, or just last week." Someone educated me on my rights, and I could do this and do that, and I didn't know. And I have like a neighbor of mine who I could help with this, or and so that's how more people got engaged, word of mouth, through a grassroots way.
I would just say too, since you're talking about your building, so when I was at Park 7, we focused, there's a huge building, it's like 375 units or something. The first thing we did was we reached out to our local housing advocates. So like Empower DC, there was another group, I don't want to mention them because they're poverty pimps. But anyway, reached out to local groups, and then we walked our building and we knocked on, and imagine, this is a whole city block. It's 5 stories. We walked the building so many times. When we were done with work, well, I didn't have a job because nobody would hire me, but we walked the building and we got people to sign up. I set up a MailChimp. MailChimp is free up to a certain amount. So we set up MailChimp, and we got people to fill out with their email address and their phone numbers and their apartment number, and I literally sat in the community center, and I waited for people to walk by, and I had signs I made, and I'm like, hey, don't you want to, like, make our building better? Don't you want to, like, take Chris Donatelli down? And and I made signs that said he was a slumlord. He even came one day and tried to have me arrested. Anyway, the point is that we had meetings, and we got those local organizations that were partnering with us to be like, we'll provide pizza and soda. Papa John's was like right near us. And so we provided food, and people came out, like, people really came out, and then we got the media involved because we had a slogan. We set up Twitter, Instagram, and we targeted Chris Donatelli, his family, his co-workers, like you did. Like, literally, his son was in high school, and we would, like, tag him and be like, your dad's a slumlord, right, whatever. We really did that. We tagged his wife. We tagged his employee's wife. We really went after them. And it happens after hours, and I have to tell you that you have to be really committed to it because it's another full-time job. It really is.
And I'll say one more thing. Look into hosting like an eviction clinic, partnering with like pro bono attorneys that's locally, and you will draw out the crowd you want at the table.
We'll have time for one more question. Yeah, I know. Okay. Okay, we'll do John's question last after this one, and then we'll wrap up.
So we've been organizing at our city council for renter protections. 2 of our organizers were no cause evicted following their testimony. Landlords have voicemail bombed tenant leaders' employers. And last week, our hearing was last week, we had anonymous landlords email threats of violence to our organizer of color who's coordinating the grad students. And then after the hearing, they accosted and harassed our members following testimony. So do you have advice of how to deal with that? Because people are afraid to, like,
So look, when they would call the police on me, I would call the police on the police. I kid you not. I would call 911 and they'd be like, what's your issue? I'm like, your police are here bothering us. I don't even like the police, but hey, if they're doing that and they have that kind of power, call the police, get a restraining order against them. Share, like, let me tell you something. We all have these phones, right? Video. If you go to the Park 7 tenants on Twitter, you will see so much video done by me, okay? I video everything. I keep every email. I'm telling you, I've been home since 2015. I've got emails that go all the way back. Keep your receipts. And when I buy that, I mean like whenever they're doing something, and share. You can share on, we have social media that's free. Tag them and show what they're doing, and then get people together to go stand outside their houses. We do that in DC all the time. We don't care who you are. Politicians, mayor, we go stand outside your house and protest. Give them some taste of their own medicine. Call a group together. If it's just 5 of you, go stand outside their house and yell things at them and say what they're doing. Put them on the other end of it, right? And if they're violating your rights, listen, anybody can file a lawsuit. I file a lot of them. It's amazing. We have, DC is unique because we have a lot of legal workers here. We have a lot of pro bono work, right? So we're very fortunate to live in the city. It kind of gives you starry eyes to think like I can go get an attorney. But I tell you, I've had attorneys come to me and be like, we want to represent you all. Park 7 tenants got a whole law firm to represent them in their efforts to hold Chris Donatelli accountable. And the first lawsuit of its kind was filed against them by the Office of Attorney General and this law firm. So you put it back to them. They want to harass you, harass them, make them feel it, and go public with it.
And I would just say, it is an option for you to go to the news and tell the reporter to remain anonymous. They will blur out the person's image and everything, and you could get the story still across publicly.
Awesome. And then we'll go ahead and just take the last question back there, and we'll wrap up. Thank you so much. And then this is your right to counsel expert if y'all ever interested in passing right to counsel in your jurisdiction.
Thank you. And that actually was a great question, was a great segue to the right to counsel, because if there is a right to counsel, an attorney can help tenants feel more secure in exercising their rights. But if it's not a right and you don't know that you're going to get an attorney or not, then that problem really exists. I just want to say that, we now have 18 jurisdictions that have a right to counsel. You heard about Washington State, 2 other states, 15 cities. The places where right to counsel has been most effective so far are where the tenants were heavily involved. Both the law that passed and the way it's being implemented, it does not succeed the same way without tenant involvement. Like you said, the tenants have the pain, they have the answers. The question I wanted to ask you is, one of the things that tenant organizers often tell us is it's not just getting the thing that we're asking for, it's that we have to help get it, or it doesn't change. It doesn't really change. If you come and do it for us, that's not the same as if we do it, like get it done. And I was hoping you could sort of speak to that from your experience, like the difference between having sort of a white knight come in and sort of fix it versus the tenants themselves actually carrying and bringing that change about.
Absolutely. I always tell, there's a lot of white pastors that reach out to me to get involved, and I tell them all the time we don't need another white savior to try to come in and save us. And I teach them ways to get involved, how to support. But at the same time, it takes all of us to collectively get the real change we need. If, just black people show up at the State House and you have legislators all white, it's not really going to be favorable for us to get any really long-term laws or things changed or addressed. So we got to be strategic. And so I think what tenants are saying is we got to make sure that we are leading this fight, that it doesn't come about the lawyers or the housing advocates that's doing more policy work. It has to stay centered around the tenants. And what I mean by that is there's been times where we've been overshadowed. When we're at the table, and then they look. It's been times when, before I even got heavily involved, where a legislator would walk right past me, and not really give me a second or a day of time to hear my story, but they walk right to a pro bono lawyer and hear all the things, all the analytics, and the story is right next to you. And, and so how do you keep that true, but also in a way of advising on the right steps behind the scenes? And so we have advising pro bono lawyers. We have advising people who's been doing housing policy work from all racial backgrounds, because we need everyone in this fight to really put a dent, and we have to be strategic as possible.
Did you want to add anything to that too, Taylor?
I think that, again, I keep bringing back to Empower DC, who helped us. We have the law clinic for the homeless in DC, and Empower DC are the people that I always send people to when they're having issues, not to lead, but to show us how to organize, because organizing is a skill. And just because you have the drive doesn't mean you really know how to organize. And those are the things that people who want to be involved but don't have the direct experience can do. They can help us organize. And so, again, I encourage people to figure out who in their community has the funding to support your organizing in that way.
Sweet. All right. Awesome. Well, thank you for your time today, Taylor and Dee, and Maddie, who was here earlier as well. And thank you for all joining us today. I just want 2 more minutes of your time, I swear. This was a really informational conversation, and I think we just want to go ahead and keep the momentum going. So I do want to share some of the work that we do at the coalition. That you can be a part of, whether you're a tenant advocate or just like a community member that wants to learn how to be more educated and be allies within the movement. So we have like monthly, now bi-weekly Tenant Talk live webinars where tenants are actually given the space to not just to meet with us, but also connect to one another and learn about different themes. The one that'll be coming up will actually be on just like tenant power and how to like take action. And then we also publish a newsletter titled Tenant Talk twice a year, and we actually just released one on tenant protections earlier this year in February. And you should be able to find it on the archives in our website, but if you got the USB in your folder, it should be on that USB as well. And then we're also starting to look for members of our tenant leader cohort next year from the 2023 to the 2024 cohort. And if you scan that QR code, that'll take you to the interest form to get involved with that. And then we're always looking for blog post authors on an ongoing basis for our blog called Beyond the Homefront. And so if you're a tenant, resident, or renter who would like to write a guest blog post, and we also offer stipends for that, just to kind of talk about your experience with advocacy around federal housing policy, and you can reach out to us about that. And then last but not least, we do have a Facebook group called Tenant Talk, if you look it up on Facebook, and that's where most of our tenant network interacts with one another and posts stories, posts articles, and stuff like that. So feel free to look us up. But again, that is all for now, and thank you for joining this session, and I hope we get to see you at the webinar on April 3rd.